everyone, I Nirmala Rawat welcome you again to my YouTube channel. When life falls away and leaves its imprint in the sand, giving rise to another life, taking along the memories which do not die, which are not washed away. They simply sink to the bottoms of the mind sea and rest there, folded in many layers of mental sediment until called forth to help the soul on its journey toward full awakening. Part 2 Ayodhya Chapter 9 Part 1 Rebirth in Ancient Ayodhya. I was born into a Kshatriya family in last declining Treta Yuga, the second of four great ages of humankind. My father worked in the administration of Kingdom of Ayodhya. He was the most loyal servant to the Maharaja Sri Ram and worked untiringly to achieve the task set for him. My mother was a modest woman and took a back seat in our family, bowing to the desires and demands of my father. Of all their children, I was the youngest and only girl. Much of my growing up years were spent alone, as my brothers were much older and were married, while I was still young, so I naturally drifted toward my mother and helped her with various chores. From an early age, I found great satisfaction in serving my parents. In fact, I had come to think that was how I would spend my life. Every now and then, my father would remark to my mother, Anasuya will make a very devoted wife. Her nature is to serve. I was pleased to hear the second part of this remark, but not the first, as from an early age I was intent on not marrying. The very thought gave me great anxiety. It was a time of growth and expansion, prosperity and innovation in the kingdom, and my father travelled a great deal, often to the far reaches of the kingdom. By the time I reached the age of 7 or 8, our beloved Maharaja Ram had died, leaving his two sons to rule in his stead. I had the opportunity at that time to be educated at a new Gurukul established for young girls. Gurukuls typically were schools where male students lived near or with the Guru. The education of girls had been a passion of Maharani Sita, although she didn't live to see its implementation. After her death, Sri Ram made it a priority to establish a place where girls could go for learning. There had been much resistance, but he persisted and in the end won the consent of sages and rishis to start a small non-residential school for girls. Learning had begun to flourish under Sri Ram's rule. Before that, it was reserved for Brahmins, princes, and other of high standing. But with the marriage of Mithila and Ayodhya, a new interest in knowledge had emerged. It was said that Maharani Sita had come to balance Ayodhya's growing might. Power without wisdom could indeed lead to unwanted results. It was not just learning we were to acquire. We all lived in the shadow of what had happened to Lanka when their ruler, Ravan, one of the most knowledgeable and scholarly figures of the time, grew arrogant beyond control as a result of his power. It was more than scholarly learning that was needed now. We would learn humility, devotion, and service, and these were the prime qualities of our Maharaja Sri Ram. He was an example for us all, as my father never ceased to remind the family. Our Maharaja had encouraged the education of girls, and although my father was reluctant to send me to the Gurukul, as I would be the first girl in my family to attend. My father felt it was his duty to do so. The experience turned out to be a mixed one for me. After several years in Gurukul, our teacher one day recited the narrative of Sri Ram and Rajkumari Sita at the point in the story when Rani Sita is captured by Ravana. I cried out, "No, it is not true," and ran from the group. Nothing could convince me that this part of the story was true. My father was called, and I was taken home, quite shaken. After that, I refused to attend the Gurukul. My father tried to reason with me. "What do you think led to the Great War?" he asked one day. "If it was not the kidnapping of Maharani Sita." "I don't know," I cried. "But I'm sure she was not kidnapped. I'm sure of it." It then became a rule in my family never to discuss this part of the story. As far as I was concerned, the Maharaja and Maharani had gone into exile, completed their time in the forest, and then returned after 14 years. Yes, there was a war, and Ravan was defeated, but it had nothing to do with our Maharani. Somehow, I felt that the part about the abduction of Maharani was a betrayal of her, a diminishment of her abilities. Surely she could have protected herself, I thought. One with courage to enter the jungle and live there for 14 years was not without the means of self defense. Besides, Maharaja Ram would never have allowed this to happen. So my thinking went, but I could never quite express the emotions roused by this part of the story. After my withdrawal from the Gurukul, I began to spend more time helping my mother in the kitchen. I remember one occasion where my mother and I had prepared a wonderful meal. As one of the servants was carrying the tray of food to the room where we normally took our meals, she tripped and everything spilled to the room. Immediately, I ran to clean it up. My father entered the room as I was on my hands and knees wiping up the mess. He addressed me sternly, asking me to get up from the floor and let the servant take care of the cleaning. I was dismayed, as he had never spoken to me in that tone before. My mother, seeing my hurt expression, took me aside and explained that my father believed everyone had a proper place in the household, and we must respect that. I should not be performing the task assigned to the servants. I did not understand this, and the incident stayed with me for a long after. My favorite place in Ayodhya was the sacred river Sarayu. She was a beautiful river, clear as a crystal and swift as a bird, with her wavelets whispering a captivating song as she hurried by. It gave me deep inner comfort to sit by her side and listen to her music. I could stay there for hours if permitted, but rarely did I have the occasion to do so. With so many foreigners now entering our city for trade and exchange, it was no longer considered safe for young girls to be outside alone. Whenever I had the opportunity to visit my friend, the river Sarayu, I had to be accompanied by a member of her household, which took away some of the pleasure for me. Deep inside, I felt the river had a message for me, a very personal message that could only be conveyed if I were unattended. I waited for the opportunity for this private audience, but it did not happen. And so the message was never transmitted to me. As I grew older, I laughed at my childish idea that the river would speak to me, and eventually this concept faded from my mind. I had hidden with me a stubborn streak, Although I was compliant in most matters, when something struck me deeply, like the story of Maharani Sita's capture, I was uncompromising. A similar response emerged when the time came for the discussion of my marriage. There was an acquaintance of my father who also worked in the administration of the kingdom and who had a son not much older than me. My father thought this is a good match and had from time to time mentioned it to me. I didn't take it seriously and so never responded. But one day he brought up the subject in a more determined manner. I was now of manageable age. When I heard the serious tone in his voice, I burst into tears and declared that I would never marry. I took him It took him some time to calm me down. Why such an outburst? He asked in astonishment. All girls dream of marrying a good man. With a heaving chest, I pleaded, please don't force me, Pataji. Seeing the fear in my eyes, he sought to comfort me. I would never force you to do anything, child. But I wanted to understand your feelings. Why this reaction? Because because I know I will die if I marry, or my children will die. Tears were pouring down my contorted face. Die? What nonsense! Who has told you this? Something terrible will happen to me. I just know it. I was trembling like the earth when things go awry. Seeing my condition, he took me in his arms and said, I would never let anything happen to you. This scene was repeated several times before I saw my parents became truly alarmed. I myself did not understand my emotions. I only knew that deep inside me I felt something terrible would happen if I married. And the very thought sent waves of fear through my being. Finally, one night, I heard my father ask my mother to find someone who could heal me of this fear. My mother took me from one healer to another, tried all sorts of medicinal plants, and even called priests to perform special pujas, but nothing could erase the fear that stalked me. Then one evening I overheard a conversation between my parents. My mother was explaining to my father that she had heard that one Mithila attendant of the Maharani still lived and was said to have healing powers. But she is far away, my mother explained. She still lives near the hermitage where the Maharani spent her last days. I don't know if she would see us or whether she can help, but perhaps it is worth a try. We have no other option, replied my father. There is a deep seated fear, perhaps from a past life, and we must find a way to resolve it. If she is to find happiness in this life, perhaps the blessings of our Maharani will flow through this woman. Thank you. Here we end part 1. I hope everyone is listening to this story. We have so much to learn from the stories. I wish everyone would have the same emotion as me. Hoping everyone will listen to the complete story. Here I am wishing you goodbye. Have a good day. Jai Shri Ram.